For topic three, we're going to look at reading a stock table, but first I got through this whole video and realized I made a goof. Okay, there's a typo. So right here where it says annual earnings per share at the very bottom of example 5, it should not say yesterday's closing price per share. It should just say closing price per share. Okay. So if you have a printed copy of the notes, please change that to closing cost per share divided by PE ratio. That is absolutely a typo on my part. Okay. Now, with that said, let's look at reading a stock table. Now, if you read through your actual textbook, they go a lot deeper. They give you more definitions and kind of a broader understanding of stocks and bonds. It's not something that's part of my financial repertoire at this point. I would love to tell you that I'm rolling in money and I have loads and loads and loads invested in the stock market, but that would be a false statement at best. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you a whole bunch about stuff that I'm not super familiar with. So what I can tell you is stocks are shares of ownership in a company. So a company can decide to go public. That means they're going to basically sell off little pieces of their company to the average Joe, me and you, or people with loads and loads of money, depending on the situation. But if a company goes public, the regular person can go out and purchase shares of stock in that company. Okay. Now, the value of that company is always changing. Okay. So when you buy shares of stock in a company, the value that you bought the shares of stock for is not necessarily going to stay the same. It can go up or down. Now, ideally, you buy shares of stock and then they shoot through the roof and then you sell them and you make a big old profit. But if you buy shares of a stock and then they tank, you could lose a lot of money. So there's definitely a risk in playing with the stock market. Okay. So all I'm really interested in, and you all understanding at this point, is just how to read a basic stock table. So we're going to read just kind of a fake example of a stock table. Now, the stock is real. At some point in time, this was real information. It's not accurate as of right now because I can tell you right now we're not in July in the slightest, but we just have some fake scenario for Facebook, okay? So I'm sure this again was accurate at some point. It's not necessarily accurate today, but it gives you an idea of how to read a stock table, okay? So first of all, when you read a stock table, you're going to get the name of the company and then you're going to get like the code for the NASDAQ, which is where we can buy and sell or trade shares of stock in companies, okay? Now, we've got lots and lots of information in this table, so I'm going to be writing lots of little notes in this table, and then we'll answer some questions about this stock table in just a bit. Okay, the first thing that we need to know is this giant 350.42. Okay, so what I want to point out right here is we're considering some fake July 9th. Okay, it's not July 9th today, so again, this was maybe accurate at some point when this book was written. But July 9th, 7:59 p.m., we're saying the market's closed. Okay, that gigantic number above the date right there is the closing price on that day. So when the stock market closed, what was Facebook trading for? Okay, so this is the closing price when the stock market closed on this fake July 9th. Okay. And then right beside that in green, we have this little up arrow, which is a good thing. And then we have 4.77. And then in parentheses, we have 1.38%. What does that mean? This right here is called the net change. Okay. And this is the change in closing from today compared to yesterday. So what this is saying in this fictional July 9th, they're saying that Facebook closed on July 9th at $4.77 more than it closed for on July 8th. Okay, so that was an increase of 1.38% per share. Okay, so that's that first just basic information. And then the next little bit of information is pretty easy. So this column right here just gives you some information about that day. Okay, so this says that on July 9th, when the stock market opened, Facebook was trading for $3 or $3. We wish. $345.32. Wouldn't that be nice to get it for $3.45 and then that same day it closed at 350, you'd make a fortune, but that's not the case here. So when the stock market opened on this fictional July 9th, Facebook was trading for $345.32. The next two value, high and low, tell you the highest and the lowest that Facebook traded for that day. Okay. Now, the next column has a kind of a tricky value and then two values that are pretty straightforward. The tricky one is the PE. Okay. PE stands for price to earnings ratio. Okay. And what it's really doing is it's looking at a closing price compared to an annual earnings per share. Okay. So if we were to look at this mathematically speaking, we would have the closing price per share divided by the annual earnings per share. Okay. Now, 52-week high and low, I think those are fairly obvious. This says over the last year, the last 52 weeks, the highest Facebook was trading for was 358.79, and the lowest Facebook was trading for in the last year was 226.90. Okay. Now, the third column of numbers, really important. The first one is volume. What is this? This is the number of shares traded on that particular day. Okay. So this stands for the number of shares in millions. That's what that big M stands for. The number of shares in millions traded on July 9th. And then we have the average volume. Basically, what the average volume is they looked at the volume for each day over some time frame. I don't know if it's a year or what, but they look at the daily volume for some time frame and they figure out the average. So this is the average number of shares traded per day over some time period. Okay, so volume is just the number of shares traded that day in millions, and average volume is the average number of shares traded per day over some time frame. And again, also calculated in millions. Okay, the last number that's really, really important is the market cap. And the market cap gives us the total value of all the company's shares of stocks. Okay, so this one here is the total value of the shares of stock. So kind of like how much is Facebook worth? And this has a big old B attached to it. That means that Facebook is worth billions in this case. So 993.6 billion. And then finally, some stocks will pay dividends to its shareholders. So they'll basically take profit that they've made over whatever time frame, and I don't know if it's quarterly or annually. Like I said, I would love to tell you I had enough money that I was investing on the regular in the stock market, but some of us teach and don't invest. Anyway, so basically it says Facebook does not pay dividends to its shareholders. So that means if it has a profit, it either keeps its profit or reinvests its profit. It does not give it to its shareholders. Some companies will take profits and they'll give a portion of it to their shareholders so you can actually earn additional money that way. Okay. Now let's answer some questions about this stock. Okay. So, what was the closing price of a share of Facebook stock on July 9th? That's that gigantic, let's actually use the black marker here. That was the gigantic $350.42. So on July 9th, when the market closed, that was what Facebook was trading for. Part B, was the closing price up or down from the previous trading day, and by how much? It was up from the previous trading day. That's that green net change, okay? And it was up by $4.77. So each share of Facebook stock was trading $4.77 higher at the close on July 9th compared to July 8th. Okay. And then part C says, what was the closing price on the previous day? Well, you would take the closing price for today, 350.42, and you would subtract that net change. Since we were up 477 from yesterday, we need to take today's price and subtract 477. So just using a handheld, I'm not going to bounce back and forth to the calculator. We have 350.42 minus 4.77. So yesterday the stock market or Facebook would have closed at $345.65. Okay? And then part D says, what were the high and low prices for Facebook shares on July 9th? You can barely see that at the top of the screen right here. Remember, this first column gives you information about the particular day in question. So we know the closing value, the net change, and then open. What did the stock market when the stock market opened, what was Facebook trading for? And then it gives you the high and low for the day. So the highest that Facebook traded for on July 9th was $350.71 per share. And the lowest that Facebook traded for on July 9th was $345.26. Okay? Part E, what was the high and low price for Facebook shares for the past 52 weeks? So going back to the table, we're looking right here. We have the 52-week high and the 52-week low. So this says over the last year, what was the highest that Facebook traded for? Like a single share of Facebook would have sold for what versus the lowest. And we have here that the high was $358.79. That's the 52-week high, I should say. And the 52-week low was 226.90. So $226.90. Okay? Part F, how many shares of Facebook were traded on July 9th? Was the trading volume below or above the average for Facebook on this day? So we want to go back to volume and average volume. So for volume, that just tells you how many shares of Facebook were traded on that day. And it's always in millions. So for that day, the volume was 13.02 million on July 9. And it says, was the trading volume below or above the average for Facebook on this day? This was below average of 15.69 million. Okay. And let's see, we've got two more questions. Part G, what was the total value of Facebook stock? So on July 9th, Facebook had a market cap of 993.6 billion. And finally, compute Facebook's annual earnings per share using the following. So annual earnings per share, remember this is where I had that typo. So if you do have a printed set of notes, depending on when they were printed, you may have had the typo. So mark out the yesterdays and just make sure it says closing price per share divided by the PE ratio. So the closing price per share was $350.42. So we get that from right here, this big 350.42. And then we need to divide it by the PE ratio. Remember, the PE ratio stands for price to earnings ratio. I spelled ratio wrong, I just noticed. I spelled it like ration. I was reading a book about World War II and rations, so maybe that's where ration came from. I don't know. But anyway, PE ratio stands for price to earnings ratio, and it's the closing price per share divided by the annual earnings per share. Our PE ratio for Facebook is $29.61 or 29.61. So we want to take the closing price, divide it by the 29.61, and we get, let's see here. Again, I'm not going to switch to the calculator screen. I'll just do this on the handheld. So 350.42 divided by 29.61, and we get, if we round two decimal places, we get 1183. So the annual earnings per share, $11.83. Okay, so that is reading a stock table. If you find yourself in a situation where you could invest, there's lots of ways to do this. It's really quite easy. There are apps now that you can do it. You can also have, like, if you're really fancy, you can have a financial advisor. I hope all of you find yourself in a position where you have the money to invest someday. A lot of people invest without knowing, like if you have any kind of retirement with like a company, a lot of times you really are invested in the stock market. You're just not like doing it yourself. You've got somebody else that's doing it. So I do have retirement through my job, but I don't get to play around with the stock market on my own. Maybe one day. And if I could kill my Lego habit, which I have a pretty intense Lego habit, maybe I too could own shares of Facebook. All right, with that said, that's it for section 8.5. In the next two chapters, we're going to use the same formula, which is kind of nice. So learn one formula and use it twice. We're going to look at borrowing, not borrowing, but buying cars and buying homes. Okay, so after we do that, we'll have wrapped up our unit on financial literacy or personal finance.